to another episode of Jews on Film. My name is Daniel Zana. I'm a documentary filmmaker, video editor, and a Jew. With me, as always, is my co-host, Harry Ottensasser. Hey, Harry, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. As always, I'm Harry Ottensasser. I am currently a Jew. I am a former film major, but a current film podcaster here in our second season of the pod.
Yeah.
And how's it going? How's it going, Daniel? How's everything with you?
It's going pretty well. We haven't recorded in a little bit, but I think, for those who were not at the Merkaz Shavuaton, which is like a retreat that we did for the holiday of Shavua, we did actually a live Jews on Film where we discussed the Ten Commandments and how it was represented in the film versus the Old Testament. And, talked about the making of the film. And that was really fun. I don't know. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I really did. It was first of all, nice to get in front of a live audience.
Totally.
Little secret that people don't know about this, and unless they watch our social clips, I guess. But we don't ever even record this together in person. We're normally over Zoom. We record ourselves, kind of stitch it together. It's at the same time. We're doing it synchronously.
Sure.
It's not like I'm like listening to your recording, waiting for the pauses, and then just sort of jumping in with my spot. Being able to sit down with you together and in front of an audience was a really, really fun experience. I hope we can do more of those in the future of Jews on Film.
Absolutely. We should tell people that this is a scripted podcast. Everything we're saying right now has been carefully crafted by our team of writers. All these
all of that is intentional. If we ever don't sound professional, it's because we want it to sound that way.
100%. I mean, we know what we're doing. We're professionals here. And, being that we are professionals, we're here today to talk about a film called This Is Where I Leave You, directed by Shawn Levy and written by Jonathan Tropper, based on his book of the same name. I think, this is a movie that we sort of decided on discussing I don't know, for me, it seemed like a great cast. I had seen the film a few years ago, but it's a really star-studded cast. We have Jason Bateman, Tina Fey, Jane Fonda, Adam Driver, Rose Byrne, Corey Stoll, Catherine Hahn, Connie Britton, Timothy Oliphant, Dax Shepard, and the list goes on. And Ben Schwartz as the great Rabbi Charles Grodner, aka Boner. It's a really fun cast. I was really excited to rewatch this through the Jewish lens. Harry, why did you suggest this film, or what appealed to you about this film?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I actually had never seen it before. We watched it in the context of this film, but I definitely was familiar with it because, not to sort of name drop, get personal, whatever it is, but I remember when this came out, it was a big deal, and it was 2014, so maybe I was too young for it. I probably wasn't, but thematically, this was definitely adult. But I remember when it came out, my dad was talking about it a lot because, you mentioned Jonathan Tropper, the screenwriter, and he wrote the book, and he was actually someone that was part of my dad's Jewish community growing up. Like my dad, kind of knew him growing up, sort of grade school, and was connected with him. And I remember at the time he was saying, oh, this was written by one of my old buddies, and it was kind of a big deal, for that. And I guess I wasn't invited when everyone went to the screening to check it out because I don't remember seeing it, but I knew it as that movie that was written about something Jewish because I knew it was about the Shiva, and it was by someone that I had known at least through my dad, but had grown up in sort of modern Orthodox Jewish community. And I knew this as the Shiva movie. I don't know if you watched the most recent season or the first season of Moon Knight, that Marvel show that came out.
Sure.
So that movie, that show, sorry, spoilers, for a pretty, a minor plot point kind of later in the season. But there's a big climactic scene where, the main character kind of goes to his mother Shiva, and there's this whole, dramatic event, outside the Shiva. And I remember I was reading this Reddit board about it afterwards because it was cool. That was another time where it was mainstream,
Mark
Judaism.
Spector,
or Judaism.
He's canonically Jewish in the comics.
In the Marvel universe, there was a Shiva, and I remember being excited by that. So I was reading about it, and I found some Reddit board where it was very funny. Someone was trying to explain, someone was like, what actually is what was that Shiva thing that he was doing? And they were like, oh, it's this observance that, Jews do when someone dies for 7 days. And someone actually said, if you've ever seen the movie, This Is Where I Leave You, they do a great job explaining what Shiva is. So that kind of pulled it back into my, into my mind. And I was like, oh, that's cool that it's not just a Shiva movie to me, but, someone was using it to educate someone else about, Judaism in the context of Moon Knight to say, This Is Where I Leave You. That's the Shiva movie. So I was very excited to kind of revisit the movie, but obviously watch it for the first time.
So before we get into the IMDb summary, and I'm going to take out my magnifying glass, my Jewish magnifying glass shaped like a Star of David. Now I know you're, particular about your melodies and Jewish customs and stuff like that. I did want to talk about how accurate you felt like the Shiva, was depicted in this film.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to bring that up as we go through. I was
Okay.
taking
Okay.
notes, but
Okay.
I will say, and I'm gonna drop some other films, one that we haven't discussed yet, but I'm hoping we will, another Shiva movie. So I'll spoil later in the conversation for when I
Hmm.
drop that. But the Shiva itself, I actually think the movie did a great job at it.
Okay.
I was pleasantly surprised.
So I feel like initially my knee jerk reaction, especially after, starting this podcast, is to kind of like find the flaw in like, oh, you could have done it a little bit differently. And I'm not gonna get into my review of it, but I feel like at the beginning when the rabbi, again played by Ben Schwartz, was just like, yeah, you just have to sit down for 7 days on chairs. And then they like the first day of it, they're just all sitting down and they're not doing anything. And I was like, this is not exactly Shiva. I mean, I've never sat Shiva. Hopefully, poo poo poo. I don't have to for a long time, but I don't know that it's like by yourself initially, unless I'm missing something, right? It's usually with people, right?
Yeah, I assume that's what he meant. You're kind of just sitting alone in the chairs, but they were all like from the beginning. I think they all sit down in a row with each other.
Right.
That definitely visually looked consistent with what I've seen. I
Uh-huh.
will concede that I'm definitely coming at this with an understanding of what Shiva is, having
Oh,
gone to many Shiva homes and,
sure,
thank God
sure.
again, myself, I never had to, but
Knock on wood.
it was, knock on
Yeah.
wood, exactly. So I'm wondering if, I saw certain things like they were sitting in the low chairs and,
I
and
noticed
we'll
that.
go through this.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just kind of filled in the gaps in my mind because I
Sure.
was like, oh, wow, they're really doing it. And maybe to the untrained eye, some of this might be a little confusing. Like you're just sitting for a couple of
Right.
days. What does that mean? Although that
Exactly.
is kind of what it is.
Sure. So let's get into it, man. Let's find out a little bit more about this movie. Harry, why don't you hit us with that IMDb summary?
For sure. So the summary reads: after their father passes away, four grown siblings are forced to return to their childhood home and live under the same roof for a week, along with their oversharing mother and an assortment of spouses, exes, and must-have-beens.
I like that. That's a good summary.
But you know what's missing from there?
Shouldn't have.
Well, just anything about Shiva, Jewishness, anything
Oh,
like that.
interesting. Yeah, for sure.
It was their father passes away. They're forced to return home and live under the same roof for a week.
Right. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Jews on Film. So we left off with the IMDb summary, and now we're going to jump into the actual plot of the film. So Daniel, why don't you get us started? How does the movie open?
So the movie starts off with Jason Bateman's Judd Altman, who we find out is a radio producer, and the on-air talent is Dax Shepard, who's playing a host called Wade. And he has this show, it's called the Man Up Show, and essentially it's just him answering phone calls, giving love advice to guys. And, it's like a nice, funny montage up top, and he's kind of an alpha sort of bro.
Yeah,
Jason
the advice is definitely a little bit shallow, a little bit broy, a little,
yeah,
what we might call toxic about, a
little
couple of
bit.
years after the movie came out.
Yeah, that maybe didn't enter the lexicon at that point, but we could tell that like he tolerates him, but you could tell Judd is like, his nose to the books, kind of like a very serious employee, and Wade kind of blows him off because he's got to leave early. Wade leaves early, and then Judd follows shortly after with a birthday cake for his wife Quinn. So he goes home and he discovers that Quinn has been sleeping with Wade for the last year, which causes Judd to sort of flip out and blow out the candles and, move out essentially. And that's sort of where his downward spiral begins. But then he gets a mysterious phone call from his sister.
Listen, there's something else. Dad wants us to sit Shiva.
Dad's dead.
Yeah, apparently that's the optimal time to do it.
Ask them 3 times to remove this awful tube. We give the man his dignity.
I don't understand the Shiva. Mom's not even Jewish and Dad was an atheist.
A Jewish atheist, and this is what he wanted.
Just gonna do it myself.
No, it's okay, Mom. Let the nurses do it.
What am I gonna do? Kill him?
Mommy, leave it!
And that's kind of sets the plot into motion. But as much as they're using the Shiva as the sort of, this Jewish custom as this gateway to, I think, a lot of other, repressed feelings and thoughts and questions about love, there is a sense of removal from the Jewishness of it all. There's like, they're very quick to point out, we're not Jewish, right? Because our mother's not Jewish, so we're not even Jewish. And our dad was an atheist. So it's a conscious decision, I think, made very early in the film to create a little bit of distance.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't think necessarily that they discount themselves as being Jewish, but they say that the mom is not Jewish. And
Right.
so, Ben Schwartz is Rabbi Charles, who I'm going to call Boner, because that was his high school nickname, and everyone knows him from high school. And he's still in town.
That's how they refer to him.
So they call him Boner. So that's what we'll call him, Rabbi Boner, or just Boner. And so they lay out the rules of the Shiva, and then everyone kind of regroups. We have Tina Fey's Wendy Altman comes into town. We have Corey Stoll's Paul Altman, who has never left town. He runs his father's sporting goods store. And then later on, we're introduced to Adam Driver's Philip Altman, who drives up at the funeral in a Porsche with very loud music playing. So we kind of get a sense from everyone's introduction what kind of a person they are.
And the family dynamics, I would say.
Oh, yeah. I thought that was kind of like interesting. Every character, at least at the beginning, has these very over-the-top sort of characteristics, so you can kind of tell, oh, this is this kind of person, this is this kind of person. And Judd is sort of this sort of safe, not risky person. He does the sort of conventional path, which he does talk about later, and does unconventional things later, but at the beginning, we have to allow our character to grow a little bit. So, yeah. What I think you mentioned earlier, the capturing of the Shiva,
right?
There's this nice montage where it captures what I thought the feelings of the family functions, where oh, so you can have kids, oh, okay, so and what do you do, okay, and where's your wife, and like this constant sort of really like prying from family members. I don't know if it's unique to the Jewish tradition, but like family tends to ask about questions that maybe they shouldn't ask, and I thought it captured it really well during that sort of first couple of days in Shiva.
Yeah, I definitely, I think when I was watching that scene, that was the scene where I was like, this is cool, because as much as you're right that they might not have explained all the details about the Shiva process, and there is a sequence where they're talking to Rabbi Boner, right? They're having the conversation with him, and they're like, oh, can we just sit for 3 days? Like, does 3 work? And he's like, no, Shiva is Hebrew for 7. It literally means 7. That's what you have to do. So in a funny expositional way, they go through, it's 7 days, and then they see the very low chairs, and they're like, we're not sitting there. And like, no, that's the point. You're supposed to sit very low and be on the ground. And like they do go through the steps of explaining it. But that scene I thought was really cool to show, the scene of them kind of sitting there and fielding all those questions, because, after introducing it, they didn't have to spend time in like, what a Shiva house feels like. And you do get this sense of people just sort of, you see people you haven't seen in a long time, people out of town, and there's a lot of catch up. Like, I think interspersed in the catch up is, you usually hear from the family a lot of reflections about the lost, the lost sibling, parent, whoever it is. So I think, I wish that they had spliced in a little bit more of that, but I know the film makes a point to say that not all of them had the closest relationship with their father, but just including, but I just think including those conversations and having people like check in, and like, there's the sequence where Judd has to answer for everyone's like, where's your wife? And he's like lying about it. And he says, oh, she hurt herself. Yeah, exactly. She she pulled a disc or something, and they make a joke out of it. But that kind of repetition and that, putting on that smile and trying to field all these different people coming to you, it feels like, in my experience, a Jewish gathering or a Shiva house. And just taking the time to do that scene and have these kids sort of sit in a row from each other and field those questions, I thought that was pretty iconic. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that Judd does throughout the film is he kind of just doesn't really tell people what's going on. He kind of suppresses it, so whether it's like his wife Quinn has cheated on him and they're not together anymore, or further on down the line where she, mentions that she's pregnant, spoiler alert, he doesn't tell anybody for a while. I wanted to jump back to one point you said about like sharing reflections of the father. So usually like, oh, we had such a great time and such a caring person. Meanwhile, Jane Fonda's Hillary Altman, the mother, she wrote a book called The Cradle and All. I think it's like a memoir or like a self-help book or something like that. Very influential for a lot of people in the movie, apparently. But she spent a lot of time talking about his member and how well endowed he was, and sort of this really sort of like inappropriate. She has like a very open relationship to sexuality in the film. They that's like a recurring gag, and so they spend a good amount of time talking about him and his performance. And she's just telling family friends about this, which I thought was kind of a real peek into the sort of not dysfunction but weirdness of the family.
Yeah, and I think her character more than anyone else is the one who really reflects on, their father. And it wasn't so present in that scene, the kind of reflection, and maybe
Right.
with the strangers, there wasn't so much dialogue about the father,
Sure.
but there are moments throughout the film. There's a conversation that Judd has with his mother, and
Yeah.
he's like, why are you like handling this so well? And she's just like, as every day goes on, I remember him more as like the great man that he was, and our love life and everything like that, and less so, the sort of bedridden, sick person that I kind of knew the last couple of days of his life. So there is a lot of reflection, and they kind of sneak in those moments of thinking about the father, but I would say it's not as the movie's certainly not about the father. It's about Shiva's
No,
effect
no.
on the siblings dynamic with their mother, but there's a little bit of like a reflecting on their relationship with their
Sure.
father, Judd in particular, and we'll get to that later when we discuss it. But for the most part, it's kind of just his death is almost a vehicle for the siblings to get together.
Yeah, for the change to happen, for sure. I mean, lest that you think that Shawn Levy, the director, wanted to have that scene that you just mentioned be sincere, she does button the scene by saying, "Oh, I'm also taking Xanax, like Tic Tacs."
Yes,
So that's
she does
helping too.
mention that.
So,
Yeah.
it's pretty funny. I think one of the things I did want to touch on, because as the siblings kind of hang out more and the spouses hang out more, just like a guest and fish, they get bad after like a few days, right? And so they start to like blow up at each other and really get on each other's nerves and sort of regress a bit about, their stuff. You're the irresponsible one, you're the coward, you're the this, you're the that. Like there's a lot of weird relationships going on. And so I wanted to talk to you as someone who has siblings, and I can relate. As someone
Yeah.
who grew up with your siblings, but now you see them as adults, like what's that been like, that sort of transition when you hang out with them for holidays and things like that? Does that ever cause friction?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would say that not a lot of fist fights. We don't really
Yeah.
break out into huge
Or
fights. We don't,
glass in your head.
or glass in our head. We're not arguing over sort of the family business. And, I don't want to compare ourselves too tightly to that. But yeah, like I grew up in a very close household. We were kind of all born within a couple of years of each other. So, from my oldest, I'm one of four, and the oldest brother to the youngest brother is like a 5-year gap total. So
Right.
we were all like sort of very close together. And, one of the things that's changed a lot is like in the last couple of years, I got married this past year, and my sister also got married this past year, and my brother got married a couple of years before then. So very quickly, in our sort of adult years, we've become a family of just sort of married children. And I think the interaction of bringing new people into the fold and like spouses, and obviously that's a big part of this film, kind of like how each of their spouses either navigates, different relationships, or, brings this kind of like outsider perspective. That's certainly something that I've experienced, that I've learned as my family has kind of expanded. It's interesting, actually. I'm trying to obviously connect this back to the film. This is a film podcast. We're talking about This Is Where I Leave You. And I think the relationship with the spouses kind of in this film, it's almost like each of the siblings, when they're back in their childhood home, almost like sheds their spouses. They all kind of create a little bit of distance from their spouse, and they all fight. Some of them resolve that by the end, but there's this distance, and they kind of fall more into their young sibling struggles. It's like they forget that they're married, and they forget that they're adults and living this external life. They regress to how you imagine they fought 10 years earlier when they were in high school growing up in the house.
Right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because Tina Fey's husband is this sort of like douchey business guy who's like constantly consumed by work and not at all present as a dad. So he's kind of out of the picture. There's a few scenes of him kind of like on the headset walking around. I'm just like, get out of here. Just go in a different room. I feel like that's so annoying. Anyway, I think that's the point you're trying to get across.
He's a little bit of a caricature of that, I think. We don't get anything about his character other than whatever he's phone calls he's having.
Busy guy, right? And so Corey Stoll's wife, Catherine Hahn, is they're trying to conceive, have a baby, so they're doing IVF and all that kind of stuff. And so that
causes a little bit of tension.
For sure, because, Catherine Hahn used to date Jason Bateman's character before, and that's like sort of a issue. And then, Jason Bateman shows up by himself, and Adam Driver shows up with his former therapist, who's played by Connie Britton. So it's like, yeah, I think you're right. I think the drama and the stuff sort of heats up when they all get together, like going back to the film. They go out to beers. I think they sneak out at some point, and so they go out and get beers as a family. And I think someone said something like, "Oh, I don't know what." Like after having beers together and they're talking and they're fighting a little bit, but they kind of said,
"This is great. All of us together. I don't know why we don't do this more often. Because we don't like each other very much. Seriously, I never got a chance to go out drinking with my brothers and my sister."
Corey Stoll is like a very pragmatic, but like emotionally distant kind of person. He has emotions, but he's just like very abrasive. Jason Bateman's kind of the heart. Adam Driver's kind of reckless.
And I don't know. I know Adam Driver's character, his Philip, is the youngest. I don't know if Corey Stoll. I assume he was the oldest.
Yeah,
so I think
seems that
there's
way.
this clear oldest youngest dynamic. At one point, Adam Driver his character makes the comment that he grew up in an empty house. Like everyone, by the time he was legal to drink, everyone else had kind of moved out already.
Right.
He says it in that bar scene. So you get the sense that they didn't quite grow up in the same household, and that's why there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of how they were raised and the kind of people they are.
Totally. And, Corey Stoll, for those who watched or listened to our previous podcast on Midnight in Paris, he's the same person who played Ernest Hemingway, which was really terrific.
Daniel, before we move on, I wanted to hear about your family experience and some of your siblings. How did it compare? Do you see yourself in any of the characters in this film?
I feel like I'm Judd, to be honest. Like
everyone wants to be Judd. The protagonist. I mean, how could you not say that?
Sure. I'm not like reckless like Philip. I'm also like not as responsible as Paul. I mean, in some ways I am. My relationship, so I have 3 brothers. And so like I'm 2 years younger than my oldest brother. I'm the second, and then 5 years to my next brother, and then 5 years further down, so 10 years down for my youngest brothers. But yeah, I think definitely when we are in close quarters and there's stuff to get upset about, or stuff just friction happens, I think, which is kind of normal, I think, with siblings, because maybe it's like leftover stuff from childhood. Who knows? We could ask Jane Fonda's character and see if she can kind of like analyze it. But I think it's all like, I think being able to like talk about things as adults to each other, but then also to like reminisce about things in the past is kind of nice. So it wasn't like we never got into fisticuffs as adults. So yeah, no glass shards in my head either. But yeah, I think it really captured the sort of whole notion of like going back to your parents' house, sleeping on the pull-out couch that doesn't quite fit, the noisy upstairs, not being able to sleep, the electricity going out, all these things that happen at the Altman household, I could kind of relate to. In some regard. Yeah. My electricity's fine at home, but
that's good.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to kind of move on in the story a little bit. As I alluded to, one of the things that sort of, as they're sitting Shiva, Judd finds out that his I'm not sure if they're divorced, but his wife at the time, I guess Quinn, is pregnant, and he finds out that it's his child because Wade, in a shocking twist, is actually sterile. So Judd has to now deal with figuring out, what it's going to be like to be a dad with his wife who cheated on him. And then all the while, it seems that like, Tina Fey's Wendy is sort of falling for her old flame Hori, who lives across the street, played by Timothy Olyphant. He's got this pretty big scar on his forehead from a traumatic brain injury that she feels guilt about because she was involved with. And then also, Judd gets involved with Rose Byrne's character Penny, and they kind of rekindle their romance. I mean, I might save this for the review, but I'm curious, like, what did you think about this whole sort of use it and lose it kind of situation where they basically sleep with other people as a way to like further their own growth? Both Judd and Wendy are like rekindling old romances with local people, and it's only after this happens that they then have this sort of epiphany about their own personal development.
One of the big themes of the movie is, reconsidering love and what that means. And this Shiva, this kind of like, life and death thing is kind of, it sets this reset on all of them. And, being in the same house kind of forces them to consider, where they were when they were last home and how their lives went in other directions. And it's kind of this theme of, when you go back to where you were 10 years ago, how could you imagine, or 20 years ago, how could you imagine, the next 20 years or the last 20 years having gone, had you made other decisions, had you decided differently? And I think that they're kind of putting that in all the characters are considering that to some extent and are, back under their old home and trying to figure that out. And I think a part of it was connected, I thought, to like the concept of Shiva and like the concept of death. And it was like, when you're faced with death, when you're faced with your own mortality, it kind of forces you to reconsider things. But one thing that I found interesting, one conversation that Judd has is, he's like with Wendy, because obviously you mentioned the two characters that are reconsidering all this stuff, and they're like sitting on the roof, which apparently was their spot that they would go out in the middle of the night. And he makes some comment just about like how no adults are happy, and no one knows how to, no one, and like, and love like sucks. And that sometimes Wendy says something like, love sucks, but sometimes it's nice. So, and that makes it worth it. And there's this very like depressed, midlife crisis sense of just, I think that the movie's thesis seems to be, do what makes you happy, find the person you love, because otherwise everything else sucks and you're not going to be happy with anything. And I think that's kind of what's happening. It's like, find the person that you actually love. And that extends every character.
Oh, true.
Kind of ends up with someone new, right? Because we have, their mother, and the big twist towards the end of the film, it turns out that she was gay and had a relationship with her neighbor across the street. And that's kind of like, and like they present that as like their father knew about it and, was on board and it was all good. So that's a nice.
Yeah. What did she say? That he was like a very liberated person or some sort of
something like that.
Yeah.
And then Judd, obviously, he kind of ends up with Penny, and we don't see Tina Fey's character Wendy end up with Hori again, but there's a sense that she's like, she's created a rift with her husband, her current husband. And, in some senses, Corey Stoll and Catherine Hahn, their relationship kind of like, they renew their relationship. It's almost like they fall in love with each other again, and Adam Driver splits up. And I'm just, I'm going through these just to make the point that that feels like the central theme at the heart of the film, more so than it's anything to do with the Shiva. It's, about kind of resetting your love life.
Yeah, no, I'm here for that.
Reprioritizing love.
The reason why I asked this question is because like that one shot where like Hori's standing on his front porch, like in his bathrobe with his huge scar on his forehead, and Tina Fey's character is driving away in her black like Escalade limousine or shuttle to the airport, and she's just like, bye, like you get to stay here and live this existence and I'm going to go back to my life. But we had a fling, and it was so like I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I could see that like Penny and Judd, that there is a future for them, because she's like, call me when you figure your shit out, and he ends up driving to Portland, Maine at the end of the movie, and he goes to find himself. And as we always do in speculating about the 10 years later or the sequel to the This Is Where I Leave You To, maybe when Jane Fonda's character dies and they all get back together, like
Shiva.
I bet that Judd and Penny will end up together. I feel like that relationship has legs because they just seem destined for each other.
This film is not, we mentioned that scene on the roof where they're saying, no one's happy and like whatever.
Right.
This doesn't feel like a happy ending type of movie where, they're all set up for eternal bliss.
Right.
Judd kind of says like, Judd says, I need to live on my own for a little bit and I'll find you soon, Penny. But he's also about to have a child with his ex-wife, and he's in a very complicated situation. And his big theme, and we should mention this, he says, he has in his conversations with Wendy, he talks about how he's always gone the safe route, and for once in his life he wants to choose complicated. But I think that's the punchline for all their relationships. Everyone is going to be complicated. Like Wendy is now going to have a very complicated relationship with her husband, and is she ever going to leave him and go for and go to Hori? I'm not so sure. Like I don't think anyone has this objectively positive. It's just confront the discomfort, and in all your relationships, like we see it with the Catherine on Corey Stoll, like them too. It's not going to be perfect, but confront some of the complication, I think.
Right. That makes sense for sure. Moving along in the story, after Judd finds out that his wife Quinn is pregnant, things kind of wind down for the film. We have Judd teaming up against Wade with his siblings, and eventually Wade decides that he's no longer interested in Quinn because he's not here for it. He's not interested in being like a dad figure. But I thought it was interesting, Judd and his mom seem to have like really good conversations about the dad. And one thing that he says to his mom is like, I'm nervous that dad would have hated me. Like he just didn't seem to have such a great relationship with his dad. And it's only after he's taking a shower and is getting shocked that he has this sort of like fever dream type situation where he remembers these like memories of his dad. Because I think at some point earlier on in the movie, they're going around the table trying to tell funny anecdotes about the dad, and Judd has nothing, which is like a sad thing. It sort of sets him up to have this sort of epiphany. But at the beginning, he's kind of drawing a blank. So
Yeah, I think the characterization of their father is that he wasn't capable or just didn't show love in a very expressive way.
Right.
There's a scene where I think it might be, I forgot who it's with. It's Judd and one of the other characters, and they kind of are reflecting on how their dad used to like show that they loved him. Maybe it's with the Adam
With the
Driver's
forehead?
character.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
by like pushing their forehead against each other, which
Right.
they kind of joke is like cold and not feeling, but honestly that feels pretty intimate to
It's
me to like
yeah, totally.
press your head against your
For
father's.
sure. Yeah, I
But I
think
think they're talking about it like it's, he couldn't even kiss us. He would just like stick his forehead against us. I think that's the line that
right.
Adam Driver's character says. So I think the point of that scene is to kind of show that, their father was very sort of repressed emotionally. And in a sense, you kind of get, I think, the idea that Judd inherits that from him. And that's why he's a little bit
Stunted.
non-confrontational with his
Yeah.
emotions. And that's
Yeah,
why he's stunted. And that's why when he catches his wife cheating, he doesn't have this huge emotional outburst. It's just like, get out, I'm leaving, I'm going to stop answering your calls, because he cannot confront it. And it's obviously, at the death of his father, he can't, he doesn't really
Right.
cry at any point earlier in the film, and he doesn't really break down, because it's kind of inherited from, their father is this, that's kind of the source of their, I guess all of their brothers, but especially Judd's, inability to meet each other emotionally and be very expressive. So that was kind of the read that I got on their father. And I think by the end of it, when he has that sort of, electrocuted induced, flashback,
Right.
he feels, he kind of concludes, oh, dad used to call me this nickname and he showed love in his ways. And
Right.
that's maybe what opens Judd up to love again.
Right.
But it's clear that they have this very stunted relationship, like you were saying.
Remind me,
Judd.
what was the nickname again? Was it Jay?
That sounds right.
Okay, let's go with that.
Judd. Yeah, exactly.
I think one other scene I want to call out before we kind of like wrap up the plot summary is, I think maybe it was at the end of Shiva. They all go back to shul together, synagogue, and the four siblings. Judd puts on his dad's sport coat, and he's hanging out in shul synagogue, and he goes outside with Philip, Adam Driver's character, and they go and smoke a joint, because he's found 2 joints in his pocket from his dad. He's like, oh, I didn't know dad smoked weed. So I thought, like, I've had that experience before. I've gotten high with my brothers, and it's like, it's like a terrific experience, because you're just kind of like a little bit more loose and like open emotionally. And I thought it captured it really well. Tina Fey did not partake in that particular scene, so it was mostly the 3 brothers sitting in a classroom. I thought the characterization was like a little bit like over the top. They were like dancing and goofing around, but like even when Corey Stoll's brother, Corey Stoll, who's the older brother, the serious one, comes in and he smokes, he ends up loosening up, and they end up having like a great time. And that like shows you, the softer side of having siblings, and sort of getting back to that more cuddly time, that more loving time. And I thought it kind of left, at least, towards the end of the movie, as we wrap up, we see that the brothers will work together in harmony on this Altman sporting goods store that's in town. And Hillary Altman, Jane Fonda's character, comes out, like you said. And, towards the end of the film, Judd finally cries. He finally lets out this huge cry, talking, I think it's when he's talking to his mom about dad. Yeah. That's sort of the scene you're talking about earlier. And then it just kind of wraps up, and everyone kind of goes their separate ways. But everyone has changed sort of drastically, while not directly tied to the Shiva ceremony, but I think just spending all the time together has forced them to like look inside themselves and look outside at others in the family, and see how they can grow.
For sure, but I definitely think that it remains complicated. You mentioned that scene, they have that, they're sort of smoking together and they're all relaxed and light. But if you remember, a couple scenes later in the next scene, I don't remember exactly when it is, they have another fight where Corey Stoll's character, he thinks that Judd is still, he sees him with Corey Stoll's wife, with Catherine Hahn, and he thinks that, oh, you still love her from when you dated, before we got married for, a couple months. And so even when they have their really relaxed moments, interspersed are these real intensity. And like, I don't even remember if there's such a meaningful come down from their big fights, other than, the next day it kind of ends and they've all relaxed a little. The Shiva ends and they've relaxed a little bit, and it's just, I'm excited to go into business with you and we're going to make this work. But there's no real sense of, cohesive harmony. It isn't this perfect happy ending. All of a sudden we're the best of friends.
No,
they're still siblings. They're definitely going to fight again in the future.
Sure.
They're all going to have complicated love lives, but they're also, going to work them out, and they're going to be siblings and a family, kind of forever, in a very sort of sweet, sentimental bow on the end of the film.
Yeah, I mean they're human, so they are
For sure.
fallible and not perfect, and subject to change. Like as we see from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie, they all change in little ways, but they're also still the same in some ways. So, Corey Stoll's like,
Bring him into the business.
Yeah? Oh, Paul, you are a good guy. Secret's out. He's the good brother. Very cool of you. Thank you.
Okay. Before you get too excited, here's the deal. When it comes to Philip screwing up, like he will, you and I are partners 50-50. Okay?
That is a deal. You got it.
So that was our summary of the plot of This Is Where I Leave You. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back with our ratings. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're here talking about This Is Where I Leave You. I imagine that most people are already tuned in at this point. Nobody's just tuning into the end of the podcast for the ratings. Unless you're just a ratings head and you want to hear this part, then this part's for you. So then there you go. So we start out by rating our films on 1 to 5 Jewish stars, taking in things into account like the cast and the crew of the film, the Jewish content, Jewish themes, and then maybe as like a bonus category, is this one good for the Jews? Harry, where to begin?
Well, I want to start by mentioning some of the Jewish isms that I found sprinkled throughout the film. We always try to pay attention to, throwaway lines, scenes, moments. Obviously, we're talking about Shiva here. So even just explaining Shiva, we mentioned the scene where the rabbi is kind of explaining, the 7 days, what you're sitting, like definitely some Jewish elements. I'm looking through some of my notes, when what's his name finds out that Judd's ex-wife is pregnant, when Adam Driver's character finds that out, he gives him a quick Phil, thank you. He gives him a quick mazel tov.
Yeah.
They talk about, they're in shul on Shabbos, and they're in synagogue on Saturday, and they call it, Shabbos. They say Shabbat Shalom. They're wearing those big kippahs. They sing a song. I wrote
Hine
that
Mato.
Yeah, exactly. Were you familiar with the song?
Sure.
Yeah. So they throw that in there. So definitely a couple of Jewish mentions. We've spoken about deep cuts, and it's hard to say, relative to, our familiarity of someone who's less familiar or someone who's, more familiar, but they didn't feel such deep cuts to me. I'd say I heard some mazel tovs and I'm like, yeah, people know mazel tov, that's familiar. But other than that, Hine Matov, it felt like some surface level stuff. They didn't really get into the nitty gritty of the Jewishness of this family. They throw Kugel. I forgot. There's a shout out to Kugel at the end.
That's right. Have you tasted this Kugel? It's terrible. Yeah, that's what he says.
Exactly. That's one of the last lines of the film. So maybe that's a deeper cut, but I'm honestly not so sure about that.
Yeah.
What do you think about all that?
I mean, it was playing the hits, like you said. It's like the things that people are familiar with. And maybe if you're not familiar with Shiva, I think they did a pretty good job of explaining it. And they kind of let the family drama play out using this sort of, that's the setting of the film. But yeah, it's not, nobody said Kaddish in the film. I thought that was kind of a big omission. Kaddish is the prayer for the as someone who mourns in that time, you're supposed to, with the prayers that you say 3 times a day, you're supposed to say a Kaddish prayer, like a prayer for the dead. And I'm surprised that wasn't at least worked into it in some way. Although not so surprised, because it's not such a, accessible prayer, So, but I thought, I wanted to jump back to the cast and the crew because,
please.
I mean, Shawn Levy and Jonathan Tropper, safe to say that they're Jewish, right? But the cast, I mean, I looked it up. Everyone except for Corey Stoll is not Jewish, as far as I know. So we could, I don't know how much time we have, but like the whole notion of Jew face, again, rears its head in this film. I mean, the actors were terrific. No doubt about it. Nobody had like this sort of Jewish caricature. So I'm glad that like, it's not like a, Bradley Cooper. Noses. Exactly. Yeah. No prosthetic noses, no like Brooklyn accents or whatever. I think in theory, this movie's supposed to take place in Long Island from what I read, but overall, there's a lot of good looking Jews, but it was just surprising that they didn't get more Jews into this cast.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was a questionable decision, and I know that there's a big, sort of secularized theme of these characters, and
Yeah.
they're so removed from it. And we mentioned that in the beginning. The movie makes a point to say that their mother's not Jewish, and they, their father was an atheist, so like they don't see themselves as Jewish, but like this isn't about outsiders observing Shiva for the sake of observing it.
Sure.
It's supposed to be Jewish characters, so to speak, reconnecting with their Jewishness. So it was an interesting decision not to go with Jews. And this I remember at the time when this movie was cast, it was like a big deal that this was like a very stacked cast and a bunch
Sure.
of big actors. And it's like,
Right.
wow, like Tina Fey's in the movie and Adam Driver and Jason Bateman, of course.
And Ben Schwartz. Shout out to Ben Schwartz.
Ben Schwartz, for sure.
Another
and
Jew.
Fonda, of course. Exactly, right. He is a Jew. The rabbi
He's the
is
other
Jewish.
Jew. So
Nice.
Corey and him are the Jews in the film.
Right. But it definitely felt like big names in favor of actual Jewish characters. Like
Yep.
it didn't feel like a narrative attempt to get, not Jewish actors for whatever reason. It was just, they went for the biggest names, but I noticed it the same as you did, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think, thematically for the film, I think this sort of, we haven't busted it out yet, so just give me a second. It might take a while, but here it is. Here's that stretch. I think like the whole notion of tshuva and the notion of like repentance or just kind of like working on yourself, returning, literally returning. So there's that. There's like literally everyone's returning to their place of origin, but also just like kind of working on yourself. And some people end up in better off situations. And so, like you said, it's not the Hollywood ending, so it's not, everything's not wrapped up in a bow, but there is some change in the film. But aside from like the sort of very thin sort of veneer of this like Shiva notion, it didn't ring so Jewish to me. Because there's a lot of family drama that sort of really took over the set piece of Shiva.
I completely agree with you. And I alluded to this at the top, but I definitely think that this movie uses Shiva as a means to get to its conversations about the classic themes of, family coming home together and reconsidering your life and facing mortality and facing, your child at home and thinking about what you should have done and repairing relationships. Like the overall theme of this movie is probably about, what it means to find love, relationships, family, that works for you. And that doesn't feel to me like a Jewish or an inherently Jewish or a Shiva connected theme.
Right.
I did this thought experiment where I said, what if you took this film and didn't make them Jewish? And instead it was just, one of those like classic funeral, like, the template of a funeral movie where everyone comes home for a funeral and all of a sudden they're together. So you don't keep them there necessarily for 7 days. And maybe that kind of gives you time for the characters to really, learn about each other and spend home for a meaningful amount of time. But this movie felt like it used Shiva and its Jewishness as a vehicle to tell the stories about family and becoming yourself that it wanted to tell. There wasn't a lot of payoff, I thought, for the Shiva of it all, the Jewishness of it all.
Yeah. And I think with the payoff, like you're saying, one of the sort of critiques I have of the film was that because it's such a stacked cast and because there's so many good actors in there, and it's similar to like, do you ever see that movie Magnolia, Paul Thomas Anderson movie?
I haven't. I need to.
There's a lot of characters in that movie and we follow all of their storylines, but it's a 3.5 hour movie. So you have that time to do it. This is an hour and 40-minute movie.
Yeah.
So a lot of change needs to happen to a lot of characters very quickly, with Judd being the main character, but all these tertiary characters have their own sort of side plots, some of which get a good amount of screen time, some of which are reduced down to like, oh, I have my fertility shot and I'm so horny that I'm going to sleep with my ex-boyfriend. It's like, so they kind of like reduce it down to the sort of barest essentials, which I thought was like a little frustrating because I could have done with maybe a few less characters and maybe more time dedicated to each one of them.
It felt that. And I've never read the book, but I was thinking that in the scene where with Tina Fey's Wendy, when she's talking to Hori. And like this Hori thing is just undeveloped because all you've gotten are some of these like glances and it's like, oh, you're still living here? Like, yeah, brain injury. And, we mentioned this line, but she has this kind of throwaway where she's like, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. And he's like, oh, it's not your fault what happened to me. She's like, but it was. And I shouldn't have left. And he was like, no, I would have begged you to leave, like if you had stayed.
Right.
And it's just, it feels like, and I want to give the book the benefit of the doubt that I'm sure there's more to that. And we can figure out what happened. Maybe they were in a car accident together. Maybe she was driving or she was in the passenger. And you'd get this sense of like the shared history they have and her maybe having more interactions also with her husband, who, like I mentioned, is just a very underwritten kind of just caricature of, busy
guy,
work call guy. Exactly. And I just got the sense that, like you said, there's so many characters here. This movie should not have been an hour and 40 minutes like it was. It probably would have benefited from a much longer cut, if I had to guess.
I mean, I would go so far as to say like Nick's a sibling. Like get rid of one sibling. Maybe I'm not going to pick favorites here, but I would say like one fewer storyline could have like benefited. But
I kind of agree.
I mean, overall, I thought the performances were good. But yeah, let's get to our ratings. Harry, what did you think?
Identifiably Jewish, in terms of like good for the Jews, bad for the Jews. I think you're watching this and it's like, these are Jews, and we can answer that question as well. But I think in its overall ranking, it wasn't such a Jewish film. Like when I think of Jewish film, I think of like thematically, I think of like the depths of it, like Jewish. But this was just a film about, a family coming together, reconsidering their lives, facing, new and old challenges kind of thing that happened to have a Jewish frame. But that's about it. So I'll give it like 1.5, maybe 2 Jewish stars, maybe 2 Jewish stars.
Okay.
Because like, this is the movie about Shiva. They make such a big point. The whole central conceit is Shiva.
Sure.
So for me to have said 1, would have been ridiculous, but I don't want to give it more than 2 because I don't know. I guess I wanted more. I wanted the movie itself to benefit from the Jewishness of the frame. I didn't want it to just be the gateway into the rest of their stories, especially with actors who we mentioned are not even Jewish and not even, playing Jewish, whatever that would mean.
Yeah. I mean,
what did you think about it?
I think I'm probably in the same ballpark. I was going to go a little bit more generous. I have a lot of stars to give. So I'll probably go like 2.5, just solely,
That's not that much more generous.
No, but I'll say I'm giving a little bit extra because of Ben Schwartz and Corey Stoll's characters being Jewish. So I want to,
hold it down.
Yeah, they hold it down really well. Corey Stoll in the film doesn't do anything sort of like Jewish. I feel like Ben Schwartz is the comic relief. Boy, if we had a rabbi like that, that would be something else. Yeah, but I think overall, like you said, the Jewish stuff provides a set piece. There's a lot of food at the Shiva throughout the thing, so that was pretty accurate. Jewish. A lot of bagels, a lot of lox, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, overall, I think it's 2.5 stars, and that's where we're at. As far as like the good for the Jews, bad for the Jews, it's not a great look for the Jews. I'm going to be honest. It just casts them as kind of like dysfunctional, and like a little out of touch.
They were, and I know comedy has evolved in the last couple of years.
Sure.
But there's that one scene when they're, we mentioned before they were smoking in the at the shul, and they set off a fire alarm, and they're kind of outside, and and the rabbi comes out.
Is that weed I smell? Was everybody smoking weed? Is that what happened?
You smelled the fire. My mom smelled the same thing.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I smelled it.
No, it's not fire, man. It's weed. You guys were smoking weed, right?
You'd know.
You know what? How about you just head out before the cops come, okay?
Smart. See you back home.
Thanks, Boner. You rock.
I swear to God, don't touch my balls. And secondly, stop calling me that. God, that was the very last time you'll ever call me Boner. Do you hear me?
Boner, God's watching.
Oh my God!
Why are you? You're like, your bones are like hollow.
Off of me!
You're so easy to manipulate.
So strong!
I'm sorry, Boner.
Come on!
Oh my God, you guys are so going to hell.
It really came off as just mean to me. I was just like, I am not sympathetic to these characters. Like, they're just like being mean and making fun. And he's clearly distressed. And there's no resolution. There's no like, oh, you're right, like whatever. It's just like, okay, Boner, like calm down. And it's just,
I mean, even the mom ganged up on him, and she was calling him, and her girlfriend, Linda, she was also laughing. So like, he really is just the butt of the joke.
It did not engender any sympathy from me.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with like, not a great look for the Jews. So
I kind of agree with that.
Yeah. So that was our review and ratings of the film This Is Where I Leave You. We'd love to hear what you think. Follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film. Check us out on TikTok. And for more episodes, we're available wherever podcasts are at. But, Harry, good catching up with you, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.
Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Daniel Zana and Harry Ottensaucer.
Harry Ottensaucer edited this episode.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.